you have to do really often is just a kind of like comms approved summary of approved grants. It's a very specific style of writing, and so it's kind of one of those tasks I've always told myself, it's just easier if I do it, because I know what the expectations are. But a lot of the information is kind of fragmented across different documents, and so I realized with FCage for context, I could attach all of those documents. And I actually started by first just attaching all of the kind of programmatic documents and then giving the context around, here's the audience, here's the style I'd like. And then I realized when I asked GPT to ask me clarifying questions, I was like, wait, like the questions they're asking me, our comms team had actually created a style guide for this very specific summary. So like, why don't I just attach that? So then I just attached the style guide and was like, use this and ask me if there are any questions. And between those documents kind of being in conversation together, the first draft of what it gave me was just like miles ahead of anything I've gotten before that was just specific to the style that I needed. So just feels like something I can really systematize from here on out.
And that's also a great thing I want to amplify, which is that when it starts asking you a bunch of questions, you don't have to answer them. You can attach documents that answer them, right? And so it's kind of like giving you that roadmap of the additional context you can add. And I thought I would share one more example from myself this week, which is that I was working on a proposal for a potential client for phase 2 work with them. And so you can see that kind of what I've put here. So this is in Claude. And I say use the brand skill, which is a Claude specific thing, the attached sample proposal and the attached financial model to build a draft proposal for phase 2 of the work, and then ask me any questions. And so very similar to what Erica was just saying, it asked me a great set of questions. We got aligned on like what sections I wanted included versus just was like in one of these documents as background, but wasn't actually relevant to pull in. And then it created a really strong draft first proposal. And again, I think like a grant summary, like a proposal is like information forward. It's not voice forward. And what really makes a proposal work is that it kind of like bridges between what the client needs and what you offer, not kind of that you are doing your finest exclamation point authorial voice writing, which would in fact probably make it a little idiosyncratic and harder to read. And so I just wanted to share this as an example of something that, kind of like, this is not just something I teach, this is something I absolutely still use myself. And yeah, ask me any questions. We'll talk about memory next week, but a couple of things I have saved in memory directly align to what we've been talking about. So one is AMAQ, means ask me any questions, and I just tag that on the end of posts all the time. And then the other one I use all the time that's very related is A-Money, which means let's get aligned first before you do this task. I want to know what you think the task is based on what I've given you and told you before you actually go off and do it. And that makes sense for like, if it's an email, there's no point in using something like A-Money because it's overkill. But for something bigger, like maybe for what you were working on, Erica, or for kind of like a job related application, it's valuable. Yeah, it is so much like managing somebody. I actually love managing people. And so managing AI for me is, there might be something in common there.
Okay, Sarah, whenever you say A-Money, do you mean like the dollar sign, or do you really mean A and then like the word money?
No, $. I saved that, and I'll show you guys that next week. So that was just foreshadowing, but yeah, I have that saved in as an abbreviation in my AI's memory because I use it all the time.
I never thought of this as like managing somebody, but I feel like that's actually a really good way to frame it, because it is a lot more like I'm telling you what to do, AI, and if you have questions as to what the task is, like, I think that's a really interesting way of framing it that I hadn't really kind of thought about.
Totally.
It'll probably terrify younger people. We're already terrified.
It's natural to them. But I think that it's also like, think about like, just to elaborate that a little bit, it's like AI really benefits from having an understanding of your goals, the context on which you're working on, an understanding of what good looks like, feedback to get there, and an opportunity to ask questions. And that is all extremely similar to a human colleague. And so kind of just even shifting your mental model toward that is going to really help upgrade the quality of output that you get from AI. So thank you for saying that, Yalda. Okay, so we are going to talk about projects today. And projects are folders for related work. Claude originated projects OpenAI, ChatGPT kind of fast followed. And then GEMS is the closest thing in Gemini, and agents in Copilot. So every of the major AIs has their own version of it, and there's small differences amongst them. I'm going to mostly show you ChatGPT's today, which is very, very similar to Claude's, and similar enough to the others that this should be a good foundation regardless of which AI you're using. And so projects are these things over here on the left. And they're folders, and you can pick fun emojis to put in front of them if you want to. And I want to start by kind of just showing you what they are and aren't, because they're not just folders, right? Like, you can think of them as folders where you can keep chats organized, and for, you know, some that has value in and of itself, as we'll see in a bit. But they're also custom workspaces, because you can create instructions that shape behavior. And so we'll look at kind of how you can add instructions up here. And then you can add files, right? So for example, we're going to actually take a look at your example from homework, Erica, because I think yours would be a great one to turn into a project. And so we'll just use that as our, like, you know, little example in a few minutes of how to do that. And so the files are kind of the knowledge that it has in an ongoing way, and any chat you have with it has access to those files. And then the instructions are essentially the operating system. So it's like telling it what you want to do, what the goal is, giving it context, etc. So we'll look at some good examples of that. And projects offer multiple advantages. They keep context together, right? So one of your big takeaways, I think, from doing the homework and from class last week is, like, it's really helpful for AI to have context, but it's kind of annoying if you have to give it the same context over and over again. So instead, by working in a project, you can stabilize the available context. It also makes chats easier to find. Oftentimes, you've kind of had a bit of a conversation and you've gotten, like, it has really rich context loaded into it, and you want to come back to it to ask it something else. It's really hard to find chats again in the future. For reasons I don't totally understand, the search feature within AIs is pretty poor. And so by having them in projects and well labeled within the projects, they're much easier to find again. And then finally, it creates these mini operating systems that help you consistently work the way you want to, rather than starting over again. So I realize these are all kind of abstract things right now. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples. And so first, I need you guys to put in the chat, what is something you are expert in? And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be professional. You don't have to be like the world's best at it. So don't feel like you're holding yourself to too high of a bar. Just go for it. Oh, Adam, financial modeling. You're going to love our last session on quantitative analysis.
I'm looking forward to it.
Details. Okay. Interesting. I guess that makes sense for event production. Right now, the Winter Olympics. Love it. Sports in general. Human rights in South Asia. Okay. Sounds like a professional one. Probably also some personal interest too. Okay, so I am going to show you how to create a very small project just to show you kind of how instructions work. So I'm going to take this statement here called "Tell me 3 things about the topic that only someone with a 90th percentile or greater understanding would have." And I'm going to come over here to my ChatGPT, and I'm going to start a new project, and I'm going to call it expertise. And just for fun, you can add an emoji, and I'm going to give you a chance to do this in a minute. So don't feel like you have to be doing this along with me. And then I'm going to put into the project instructions, and the way you put in project instructions is not super obvious. You go to the 3 dots and then to settings, and then you can see the name here, and you could change that if you wanted. And then you have this opportunity to put in instructions. The box is tiny, but you can actually drag it to make it bigger. And so I'm going to grab this, the "Tell me 3 things that only somebody with a greater than 90th percentile understanding would have." And I'm going to put it in the chat. And then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and hit save. And so now I can take one of your let's say like the Winter Olympics. Let's see what it will say here. Since that one got the most hearts as a topic, 3 things that only somebody with a 90th percentile or greater understanding would have. And it will read the project instructions, which already encode what to do here. And so if you think about kind of working with AI where kind of you have workflows that repeat, it can be helpful to just put the repetitive parts into instructions so that when you're interacting with it, you don't have to kind of give it that instruction over and over again. And so, Erica, do you want to give this a like little bit of a read and let us know what you think? Everyone can read it.
Maybe I should have been more specific that I'm an expert in all the human stories of all the athletes at the Winter Olympics. So if you want to write about Chloe Kim or these other
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, so one of my, or go ahead. Anything else you want to add here? Or anyone else have any reactions to this?
I can't help but chuckle at the metals are engineered and like there's like a whole like, you know, metal gate thing going on with the metals falling apart. Like,
yeah.
So I'm laughing at like the fact that, I mean, I don't even understand quite. It's obviously it's not, they're not meeting the actual physical metal, but
yeah.
it's the irony of that being number 2. And I'm like,
Yes, that is ironic but coincidental because they're talking about how like essentially like a big part of like whether you win or not is actually an engineering problem on what are all of the like tiny variables that could give you a very small margin extra, and therefore does your country have access to the ability to create advantage in those areas, so above and beyond just kind of like athlete performance in the area. One of the things that I would note about this is these are truly not super obvious things, right? This really does reflect some level of expertise. So in addition to kind of like we can see how the project instructions are operating such that the only thing we had to drop in here was the topic, I also wanted to show this because it shows kind of the depth of knowledge that AI has under the surface. And so if you kind of like probe it and ask it for more and show that you're an expert and ask it to be an expert, it actually has a lot more available than if it's just kind of when it's starting to interact with you, it's like, well, I'm talking to the median user here, let me be a median user until I kind of start to understand the depth that the other counterpart party is bringing to the table. And so this is a project that I have and I actually use, like if I'm like trying to learn about a new area, I'll often kind of just start with this and then I'll be like, all right, let's go down to the 50th percentile, or like number 2 is interesting, tell me more about this. And so this is something that I use for my own learning. And so I wanted to do it as an example because it's really small, and then I want all of you to go ahead and set this up so that you know how to do this. And if anyone needs me to show steps again, I'm happy to do that. But when you have done it, go ahead and put ready in the chat when done. I was thinking you could just copy and paste these instructions, Yalda, but if you're feeling like it, go for it. You know, we're gonna have a ton of time here, so if it's complex, don't do it, but if it's something small, go for it. Julia, remind me what your topic is and how did it do?
I couldn't decide on an expertise, but I just put in prenatal care because I'm 7 months pregnant, and it did pretty good.
Yeah.
I was feeling resistant to call myself an expert, and
but now you feel like you can. You've benchmarked. Anyone need me to show any of those steps again?
Is it basically the same in Claude?
It's basically the same in Claude, yeah.
Okay. Sorry for background noise also.
Yeah, I have Claude open, so I can just, while people are finishing up, I can just say, if I go to projects here, I can create a new project. And so I would put expertise here and then create project. And actually you want to put it in the instructions. So I would actually put it there. Sorry, I just copied it in the wrong.
Got it.
Okay.
There we go.
Let's see how people are doing. We've got, Erica, how did it do with yours?
Pretty good. I'm reading through it now and processing.
Oh yeah, we already did yours. I guess maybe you did another one. Okay, it looks like most people are through. Does anyone have a question?
Wait, was I supposed to put something in the context?
What do you mean by context?
I'm sorry, in the instructions.
Yes, the thing that I had pasted in the chat was what you were going to put in, and then you were going to test out your area of expertise against it.
I think I did that, but it didn't work.
Which part didn't work?
I put in the 3 dots thing.
Yep.
The 90th percentile, and then I put my name of the topic, and then I pressed enter, and it didn't do. Do I need to put a question in the chat as well, or?
You have to do it in the chat. So you don't put the topic in the instructions. You make the instructions agnostic. And that way, like, I could come back to my project here. So I've got this project on expertise, and I could drop in somebody else's topic here. So if I wanted to do prenatal care, since Julia just told us about that one, I could then put it in. So the idea is you're leveraging that one set of project instructions for any chat that you're having with it, within that project. And we can come back and look at it, Yalda, at the end if it's still not clear.
This is going to help me so much. So excited.
Good. And so that was just one of the common types of instructions. And we haven't even attached any project knowledge yet. So some of the other instructions go back to this, like, it's like managing a human, right? Where, like, you can give it what your goal is, right? And, like, one of the kind of things that some of you might have heard is, like, you know, kind of like a prompt tip of, like, tell it to act like a CEO, or tell it to act like it's a chief technology officer with 20 years of experience. That doesn't help. There's actually research showing that. And on the margin, it can hurt a little bit because you're essentially constraining the role and it's better to give it the goal, right? Like, if you give it a goal, it will call on all of the roles it has available to it as needed in order to help you achieve that goal. And so starting with the goal is often quite valuable. Then giving it kind of context and preferences. So kind of like, hey, here's some things you should know that are generally true across this project, but maybe don't rise to the level of, I have a full attachment of communication style guidelines. Then you have triggers. So, like, when I do something, here's what I want you to do. And so that's what I just showed you, right? Which is the, like, when I drop a topic in the chat, I want you to tell me 3 things only an expert would know. And then you can give it suggestions for output format. So kind of like, what format do you want the output to follow? Do you want it to be like, have particular sections each time? Do you want it to have bullet points? I tend not to be somebody who's overly constraining in this way because I generally just like AI to decide because I don't want it to have to come up with 5 things when it only has 3 points. But if there's kind of output format that you want, you can put that in. And you can tell it things to avoid. And so, for example, I used to use an email writing project a lot when I was working on designing a school because I had to do a lot of formal outbound email writing. And one of the things that AI started doing was slipping in, like, parental advice into the emails, which was, like, wildly inappropriate. And so I just put kind of like, avoid doing that. And it never did it again once I put avoid doing that. So if something starts cropping up in your chats where you're like, I don't like that, I don't want that, or kind of like in the context of managing a human, if you would also tell a human, make sure you don't X, tell the AI, make sure you won't do X. And then finally, and this is one that definitely works in ChatGPT and everyone else should check whether it works, is you can actually include links. So this is relatively recent that this works. But for example, if you, we'll look at a cooking project later, but if you have a cooking project set up and you're like, here's my favorite recipe from like Love and Lemons, you can actually put those links and it will pull the content from those links into chats with you. And so let's take a look at kind of like how we could use more of these features. And so before we dive deeper into instructions, I want to talk about attachments. And there's essentially 3 places you can put information. One is in the project, and so that goes across all chats that you have with it, right? So kind of like for example, if Adam set up a project about his dog and he wanted to kind of have that context on what the dog needs available across any chat about the dog, because it has kind of the dog's age and kind of stuff that you would want AI to always know, you could attach that across the project. To a chat, it would be specific information for that particular thing you're working on, but not for the whole project. And then finally, in project instructions, those are the directions you want AI to follow each time. And so what I thought we would do is look at an example and figure out where we're going to put things, whether we're going to attach it to the project, to the chat, or put it in project instructions. And then, Erica, I picked your homework as the thing that we're going to think about. If we were setting up a project here, what would we put across the project, into a chat, and what goes into project instructions? So everyone go ahead and give this a read. Erica teed it up at the beginning of class. And then we will discuss how to set up this project. Okay, so Carson, what is something you would attach here at the project level?
If there's anything that's going to be consistent across these different examples. So I think some of the instruction at the top could be there in terms of like, this is typically what this type of writing looks like, and here are examples.
Yeah, so do you want to tell me what you mean at the top? What part you're talking about?
This is to generate summaries of newly approved grants, that like this is extracting high-level information from a variety of sources for like this type of audience or something like that.
So that's the kind of thing I would put in project instructions, right? The thing we were just doing, right? Give it the goal is to write grant proposal summaries. For context, I have attached these various documents. And so I think that, you definitely want to encode that information, but project instructions is where I would put it. What would you actually attach to the project?
The writing style.
The writing style, yeah, because that's going to be consistent across every project. Erica, anything else you would attach across the whole project as the person who was doing this?
I'm not sure. I feel like I'm a lot clearer on what to attach to the chat and the project instructions, but less so on project.
Yeah, well, so maybe we'll do that next, which is what would you attach to the chat itself?
Yep, so the chat would be anything specific to that one request that I'm running, that one grant summary. So any information specific to that grant that I'm trying to generate the specific summary for, I would attach those pieces.
That's exactly right. So I think that at the chat level is anything specific to the grantee. And so it's kind of the recommendation memo and or the grant metrics that are specific to them. If you had kind of like a proposal from them, anything that is specific to them is at that level of the chat. If you were setting up the project to be kind of a general proposal, kind of summarizer. Yeah, Yalda.
I'm probably jumping ahead, but it seems like you can then create a new project with your question if you want. And is that where you would, like, because if it's not, if you ask for expertise and then you have a very specific expertise and then you want to upload just for that expertise, do you start a new project?
I think of like, for me, generally a project is defined by context. And so kind of like if for example, my goal is to just like write proposal summaries efficiently, I will create a project called Proposal Summarizer. I will put on the project level attachment would be like the communication guidelines, right? Because they go across every chat. However, Erica may also want to start another project called X Grantee, right? And in that X Grantee project, she might want to have the kind of like proposal summary, the investment recommendation, their proposal, grant metrics, right? And so every time she's getting a kind of like important document from them, she might want to be kind of adding it to that particular kind of project. And so I think it depends totally on what your project objectives are. Is your project objective creating a summarizer, or is it kind of having context always available and up to date for any kind of question you want to ask, any piece of writing you want to do, any update somebody's going to ask you for related to that particular grantee? Does that make sense?
What about things related to kind of tone of the output? Would you put that in the like overall summary or the instructions?
Yeah, so it a little bit depends. So in Erica's case, she had a really great communications document because it already had like examples of what strong communication looked like. So in that case, I would attach it. Oftentimes, like as a startup person, I don't have one of those documents, so I put it in project instructions, right? And at some point, if it feels like it's outgrowing your project instructions, you could then turn that piece of it into a document and attach it. But there's no one right answer. It's more just about kind of like how developed is it? And for the level of development that Erica's had, attaching it to the overall project makes sense. And so I wrote up some example instructions, and everyone can give me feedback on these, but this is maybe how I would do it for a project like Erica's. I would say I would give it a goal, right? The project is to write proposal summaries for new grantees at X Foundation. AI is smart. It reads the internet. It knows things about where you work. And so it can be helpful just to kind of give it that specific, because it will actually understand kind of like a bit about like what your values and priorities are just from even giving it that small bit of specificity. I would tell it what's attached and how I want it to use it. So I would say attached to the project are like the comms guide, use this for style guidelines, and proposal summary examples. So use this to understand the structure and cadence. So like if, for example, I were Erica and I had done one of these in the past, and she now has an example of one that she's done, if she hadn't done one in the past, I might just kind of say like, look at this attachment. I've done this before. You can use this as a model for what good looks like, essentially. And the one thing that AI kind of has a little bit of a challenge with is it sometimes thinks that what you have attached is what you want. And so kind of if that's happening, I would then add to the avoids, like avoid oversampling from the attached proposal, right? Like start fresh each time, just use as an example. But that kind of instruction is something that's responsive to like the quality of the output that I'm getting. I wouldn't add it in to start. And then I've got a trigger here. I would say when I start a new chat, I'll share grantee specific information for you to use to write a proposal summary. I want you to review it and review the project attachments, then do two things in succession. Ask me any questions you have about the proposal summary, said that twice. And then align on key sections and key points you'll include in the proposal summary. So this is essentially me doing that kind of like, I'm telling you that I've given you this context and I want you to review it and then also kind of like that alignment opportunity where it's like, ask me any questions you have. And then I actually want to kind of get aligned on what your plan is. So what are you thinking the sections of this are going to be, and what are the key points? Now in Erica's case, like it actually did a great job without her having to kind of do this alignment step. And so you might not need it, right? I tend to be kind of a minimalist when it comes to instructions, like add them where you need them. Don't just write something where you could. But I wanted to include it because this is, as I was saying at the beginning, something that I am often doing with AI is saying like, let's get aligned on what you think the task is and what your plan is for executing on it before you actually kind of like do it. And then finally, is just like once aligned, I'll ask you to generate a proposal summary. And this is your opportunity to say things like, if you are using an AI that still uses a bunch of emojis, you can say kind of like, don't use any emojis, don't use any bold, whatever kind of, use tables and bullet points as much as possible, or avoid tables and bullet points. Whatever the things are that matter to you are things that you can put into the example instructions. Carson, you had a question about what to put into instructions versus what to attach. Does this help make more clear like the types of things I would put into instructions, or any questions?
Yeah, this makes sense. And it could be that, as you were saying, some of it, it's like you could do some of it in either place, but it would just look a little bit different.
Yeah. And one thing I would highlight is I do tend to like to tell it this thing that I've put here, like what to use the attachments for, not just kind of like there's some random attachments and I'm not giving you any context on what they are or where they're for. I find this just gets like somewhat more consistent results from AI, because like a human employee, it's useful to know kind of like what you should be using these things for, not just that they exist.
I mean,
Any other questions? Yeah.
This is a personal example, but this is
Yeah.
something that like for me, I see myself doing like I use AI a lot for like packing lists, like doing itineraries when I'm traveling. And so like what I find, and so like for me, I'm already like in my mind, I'm like, okay, in my instructions, like I want it to look at the weather wherever I'm going, and I want it to make sure that it's taken into consideration the weather, and the different things that I tend to ask it on a consistent basis. And so that's in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I see instructions, is like there's the same things I ask every time that I'm like, hey, don't forget about this, or don't forget that we need a little bit of downtime, before we're not going to go, every single minute of every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Adam, it really does. Like, it's a game changer.
And I have to say that kind of like with the packing example, it's also something you can apply to like travel more generally, right? So for example, kind of like I've had people take this class who've set up travel projects for their families where it's like, we are a party of X traveling generally from this airport. We prefer to stay in places with these qualities, and so it's just like all that context that you would be giving over and over again, you can kind of like give once in the project instructions, and then any trip you then plan in a different chat, you've kind of already got that information stored in one place.
I'm creating that project right now.
Okay, so sorry, same thought,
Yeah.
Just another one. I just used
Yeah.
it. Is my daughter is a high school golfer, and so
Yeah.
so we created a project for her golf courses, and so it knows
Mhm.
like in the instructions, it knows like she tends to shoot right, and so it takes in consideration the weather, with the humidity, and how she tends to shoot off to the right, and it will give her places of like where she should be aiming on each hole, like for the first shot off the tee, and things like that too. So again,
Incredible.
like these are personal examples, but
Yeah.
things that I've been playing with this past week.
Yeah. Yes, and kind of like Kat saw me present on project instructions at this workshop in Texas that her company did event production for. And for that audience, which was Educate Texas, I was doing examples on like learning related things. And I used like AP Spanish as my example, but like you could put into the instructions like kind of like your goal is to like get a 5 on the AP exam. You like want it to kind of like use a particular form of Spanish, right? Is it using Castilian Spanish or Mexican Spanish, right, when it interacts with you? And so there's just a lot of ability to kind of shape the instructions based on like what you want and the things that matter to you, whether they're personal or professional. Okay, so we've now used more of these instruction types, and eventually by the end of this, you'll have seen all of them. Last time I mentioned this context engineering point, which is making sure AI has the information to do high quality work. And so we just talked about how you can kind of put information into attachments, into instructions, and then into individual chats. And so I'm guessing kind of, for example, Kat, with the golf stuff, you're kind of giving it in the individual chats, like this is the golf course that we're talking about, right? But then you have kind of all of her, like in the instructions, you have things like maybe like my goal is to shoot an X or to be a college, scholarship player or whatever the goal is. And then you put in all her characteristics. Yeah, exactly. And so projects stabilize context, right? So again, it's just this like very simple but profound point that kind of like they give you the opportunity to kind of not have to catch AI up and for it always to have access to high quality sources for anything you're working on related to a particular topic or scope of work within your life. So the next thing I want to talk about is organizing chats. So I have some projects where literally their only feature is that I use them to organize chats. So this image looks a little bit screwy because what I did was I took a snapshot of my actual strategy and business development project and gave it to Gemini and asked it to create a version with fake names so that I wasn't kind of disclosing information that I shouldn't be. It did okay. It did a lot better than AI would have done a year ago. And in general, kind of image generation is great. And Gemini leads the pack on image generation for those of you who want or need to do that. But basically what I do is I create a new chat for each client and I rename the chat and put an asterisk in front of it if it's an important chat. Sometimes I will just have a one-off question about business development and I just like let that be a random name without an asterisk in front. But if it's an actual thing I'm working on, I want it to be very easy to visually find it again in the future. Because if we go back to, let's see, what it named our expertise. Okay, so it actually did okay on naming these, but oftentimes it names them really dumb things. And they're very hard to find again in the future. And so you could say just kind of like, everything in here is expert level. So let's get rid of that and put prenatal care here. And that way, kind of when we open the project again, it's just much visually easier to kind of see what this is about. And we have the asterisks to tell us that this is important. And so what I will do is kind of after any call I have, I use Granola as my AI note taker, which I highly recommend and could answer questions about at the end if interested. I just like copy and paste the meeting notes into the chat for that client. If we have kind of a draft proposal, I then attach it to that chat. If we get to a contract, I attach it to that chat. And that way kind of all of the context is available if I have questions that I'm working on as I go throughout that kind of business development journey with that particular client. Any questions about kind of organization of chats? One other thing I will point out is you can actually take chats in and out of projects, right? So for example, like if you started a chat and then you were like, oh, this actually belongs in my expertise folder, I could come down here and I could say move to project and move it to expertise. I don't know why that's not actually clicking, but you can also just drag it. Is that not working at all? Normally this works normally. Interesting. There we go. Moved that time. Just needed to refresh. And that way kind of like sometimes you don't realize that a chat's going to be important until after you've created it. Or sometimes you actually have project instructions that you don't want to govern the thing that you're working on, but you want to keep it together. And so you could like move it back out in order to, and now it's back out here, in order to kind of like work on it. And then if you're kind of get to where you're done with it, you can then put it back in. Any questions about moving or organizing? I will often find that this is a good place to just start, is like, let me just start grouping like with like. It's sort of like decluttering, where you're like, let me get all the like socks together. And then once all the socks are together, let me assess how many socks I actually need and what I'm trying to do here. But similarly, it's just like, let's kind of get some basic organization. And then over time, I might add project instructions. Or if I get a little further with my business, I might have kind of like a strategic plan and I attach that as project knowledge. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about here is just project memory, because if we go back to our expertise project, there was a setting I didn't talk about down at the bottom, which is memory. And there's two options here. And one is default memory and the other is project only memory. Project only memory means that kind of essentially you've created a sealed box. So anything inside this project isn't going to get out into your other things, and the things outside aren't going to access it. And so, for example, if you had a project on like your own health or your own finances that maybe you didn't want kind of talking to the rest of your AI setup, or vice versa, you can instead of default, you can select project only, and that kind of creates that sealed box. You also have the ability to share projects. So for example, if I want to share a project here, when you share a project, it changes it to project only memory. And then kind of like once it's and the reason it does that is because it doesn't want kind of like my AI and your AI both influencing the output. It wants like that level playing field without kind of like accidental stray information leaking in from either of our AIs. And so it becomes project only memory if you share it. Any questions about sharing? Sharing projects, or go ahead.
Yeah, does that then mean if I share it with a coworker that we jointly see all of the different prompts that we put in then?
That is correct.
Okay.
You can see each other's chats. You do have the option. So for example, when I went to share it, I can either make the person can edit or can chat. And if they can chat, they can't actually change the instructions or what's attached to the project. They can just chat with it. Whereas if you make them edit, they can also kind of update the instructions or the documents attached.
Does it matter what, like if you're sharing it with someone who maybe doesn't have the same level of ChatGPT or somebody who has like using a free version or something like that, how does that impact?
It's a good question. All right, I think I know the answer to this. I think there's two levels to it. One is something I should have said, which is you can only share with people if you're on a workspace account within your domain, right? So for my Kaleidoscope ChatGPT, I could only share with people with kaleidoscope.education email addresses. Whereas if you were on a personal account, you can actually share across domains, right? So if I was on my like Gmail account and I wanted to share it with you, Kat, I could. Whereas from my Kaleidoscope account, I could not. That's one level. The other level is kind of what shapes the answer is also just kind of like you can see that there's different models here and for kind of essentially the brain of the AI. And we'll talk more about that in a future session. But your brain is always going to be what's available to you on your account level. And so I think you should be able to share projects with people with free accounts. They just maybe aren't going to have access to the same level of like reasoning you would have if you were on a paid account. Does that make sense? Good question. Any other questions? So just to
sorry, I do have one more question. Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah.
You had mentioned early on about the like AMAQ, like that was in your memory.
Yep.
So is
memory is going to be our whole topic next week.
Oh, got it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I'm just doing this little bit on project memory right now because it's part of the project instructions. But last fall, Claude and OpenAI, or ChatGPT, both added something called project memory. And so that's an extra layer of memory to help carry context from one chat to the next inside of a project. So if you are kind of like doing that thing that I suggested Erica might do at the beginning, where she had like a project for each grantee or something like that and had all of their relevant documents in it, essentially kind of you're not getting perfect carryover from one chat to the next inside of it, but it is kind of prioritizing what were the most important things Erica's been talking about recently and pulling them into kind of subsequent chats within that project. And that's kind of separate from this kind of then default on kind of is your persistent memory operating normally? And if you use the default option, it does. Whereas if you use the project only memory, it creates that sealed container I was talking about, where kind of it doesn't have access to any personal information it would have picked up from other conversations from you. And this is required for sharing projects.
If it's project only memory and it doesn't take from, that personal info, is it still pulling from the internet?
Yes, it still has access to the internet. It just doesn't have access to any of your prior interactions with AI. And this is what they look like. So project, and like you can always kind of like read the help text, right? So like for default memory, it says projects can access memories from outside chats and vice versa. Whereas for project only memory, projects can only access its own memories. Its memories are hidden from outside chats. Okay, so for this next project, I want to show you kind of a networking project I created when I was working on the school. This is one that was like, it's a great example of a project that was extremely helpful to me at the time because I had to figure out how to talk about something as complex as a school in very simple ways to lots of different types of audiences. But it's not something that kind of like I needed after I figured out how to do that. And so let me kind of just show you a demo. Hi, let's run the scenario again from the top.
Absolutely. Picture this. We're on a rooftop coffee bar in San Francisco, late afternoon, just after a panel on reimagining the future of learning. The sun's dipping low, small clusters of attendees are chatting, and there's a lively hum in the air. A sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s, wearing a navy blazer and a graphic tee reading "Skepticism is a Feature," strolls over, sets her espresso down next to you, and smiles. Hey, mind if I join you for a minute? I'm Mara. I run early stage EdTech at Cardinia Ventures. We do seed and Series A, usually infrastructure, but I'm curious about models that think outside the box. Your name came up in a hallway chat. Rock Creek, right? She tilts her head, friendly but clearly sizing things up. So, what exactly is it?
Now it's like my turn to actually kind of pitch what I'm working on. And because it's kind of a dynamic voice mode, I can go back and forth, having a real conversation. And then at the end of it, I can get feedback on what I did and how it went and how I could improve. And then I can do what I just did at the very beginning, which is say, all right, let's run that scenario again. And so let me actually kind of tell you a few things about the instructions so that you can, let me go back to screen sharing. I said, when I start a new chat, give me a person to meet and a scenario where I'm meeting them. Start with setting the scene. For me, that's the kind of thing that makes me start feeling a little bit nervous because it's like, oh, I can kind of like, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I've been in that situation before. Have the person introduce themselves. Pause to allow me to introduce myself, and then allow for some back and forth with some real life edge to it. And then I said very how inclined or disinclined they are toward what I'm doing, right? Because this is the thing that's hard in the real world. Like you can't win over everyone. You don't know what they think of you. And so just kind of like give me that kind of real life kind of scenario example. And then when done, I want direct feedback on what worked well and what I could improve. And so I gave it a number of personas to draw from. And essentially each of these are kind of like, you could set them up each as kind of like a different chat where you could have like a chat where it's kind of like investor versus a chat where it's former colleague, but kind of whatever kind of stakeholders you want to practice on, you could set up as different types of personas to interact with. I actually found one of the really valuable ones was stranger, no obvious connection to your work, because that's actually probably the most common type of person you meet. And you need a way to kind of talk about what you do that's not, that's like accessible, but not like too detailed, right? Okay, and so any questions about that project before I tell you a little bit about voice mode? Okay, so about voice mode, it's currently highly developed in ChatGPT and Gemini. This is one area in which Claude is less developed. It's rate limited for all accounts and much more so for free accounts. I think it's about an hour a day, but they don't publish a number. And it currently speaks more than 50 languages that cover 97% of people. It dynamically adjusts to your fluency level. So for example, when I speak Spanish with it, it exclusively speaks Spanish back to me, but it tells me it speaks at like 80% of the rate that it would speak at if it were talking to a native speaker. Whereas when I speak French with it, I do not speak much French, and I rarely do this, but like it uses a few French words and a lot of English words because I don't really have much French.
Hey, Sarah, quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, quick question. I see a video on there. Does it do American Sign Language?
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. I want to know the answer to that. I don't know.
Okay.
Because I was about to tell you about the live video feature. If you, and it's only available on your phone, but if you have ChatGPT on your phone and you hit that little video camera, it will just kind of like talk to you about whatever it can see. So for example, I recently had the experience where I was like, oh my gosh, my toilet's been running for like a few minutes. This doesn't seem good. Let me go see what's happening. And so I like took the lid off and it was like, oh, see that like yellow seal thing? That's like, it's flapping around. It's no longer kind of sealed. Kind of it's degraded and you need a new one. And so it was like, you should turn the water off. And it kind of like talked me through how to like turn the water off, told me what part to get. I walked to my hardware store nearby, got it, and fixed it myself very quickly. And so this like live video feature is really helpful for kind of just like when you're looking at something and you're not sure what you're looking at and you want feedback. What are you hoping it would do with ASL, that you could practice with it?
Yeah, so my youngest daughter is taking ASL as one of her foreign language or one of her world languages. And I'm just curious if she could interact with it to practice her American Sign Language. I mean, it's a language. I'm just feels just curious.
Easy enough to try. That would be really cool if that worked. I'm excited to hear the answer. Any questions about the voice mode or its features? I think that this tool is very helpful for any conversation that feels high stakes. And what that is depends on like what is happening in your life. But if you are doing, kind of sales calls and they're not something that you're used to doing, you're prepping for a difficult conversation. I know from like past work that difficult conversations is the thing that people always want kind of like more professional development on. And kind of this essentially, you can set up a flight simulator essentially, right, for difficult conversations by setting up a project on it where you can just keep practicing until you kind of build up some fluency. I think for something like interview prep, also really helpful. What are some things you might attach to the project if you were using it for interview prep?
The job
description.
Yeah, job description would be a good one. I'd probably put that at the level of the chat, I'm guessing, because you might be prepping for more than one job and want to reuse the instructions. What else might you attach?
Your resume.
Yes, and where does that one go? Chat or
Instructions.
Project level. Yeah, because you want that kind of always available. What else could we attach?
Stuff about the company, but that would be at the chat level.
Yep, you could tell it something about the company if you had it at the chat level. Yeah. Anything else?
Maybe stuff about the field that you're in,
and
or other people who are like have jobs similar to you or the one you want, and that might be at the project level. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, at the project project instructions level, I might have something like, my goal is to get a job in a role called XYZ working in field Y. Your job is to help me prep for interviews for those sorts of roles or something like that. A couple of other ideas is you could have it like take the resume and actually create like a likely rubric for that job, right? And then you could, like the hiring manager might be using, and then you could attach that, so it could actually evaluate your interview from the perspective of a kind of like potential rubric for the role. If you also like knew that you had some like strengths or weaknesses, you could tell it kind of like, my interviewing like strengths are X, my weaknesses are Y, particularly help me work on those. Just so anything that kind of like feels contextually relevant to it. Any other questions here? Kat, this is yet another good project for your high school age children. Interviewing for colleges. Okay, we just did that. So I wanted to show an example of a cooking project. So this is from a past participant. And so go ahead and give it a read, and when you have, put ready in the chat. Okay, remind me, is it Kyra or Kira?
It's Kyra. Like Tyra
Kyra.
Banks, but with a K.
Great. You clearly had to say that before. Kind of how like I can say kaleidoscope is kale like the vegetable. I do like we're getting married scope. Kyra, what do you think something that's good about this project? These are the instructions, I should say.
Yeah, I like the details of like talking about you want a weekly plan. You're including that it's not just for you, so the portion sizes are going to be bigger.
Yeah, some helpful context there, right? Where it's like, don't give me like a recipe for tonight. I want like a weekly plan is my output. And then kind of like, I want, kind of some specific things hit. What else is good about this project? I'll open it up.
The other thing I was going to say too is I like that they added the farmer's market, because I would probably add the certain grocery store I would go to for sure.
Yeah, it gives it helpful context also on just kind of seasonality, right? Because if you're going to the farmer's market in January in Wisconsin, you're not picking up much more than like cabbage, potatoes, and apples. Yeah. Anyone else? Something that's good about this project?
The level of prep and the distinction between kind of meal type and what is needed for each meal.
Totally. And I have a cooking project, and this is something I also have in mind, which is kind of like breakfast and lunch has got to be like a 5 to 10 minute affair, whereas like dinner can be 20 to 30 minutes. I think it's really helpful just for it to know kind of like what level of effort you're in for, things of that nature. What else is good about this one?
The last sentence, sort of really thinking about what's, assumptions about what I already have, and then so it won't always be every single detail,
If you find this project useful and start going down this path, something I have done is I actually had it, I first said like, what do you assume I have on hand? And then I was like, interview me about what else I might have. So it actually has kind of I have as a project attachment, like here are my pantry staples of things I always have on hand. So it knows kind of like both my kind of what I always have on hand, and then after I go to my farmer's market, I take a picture and just like update it on like, this is what I got at the farmer's market this week. And so it's able to kind of create the plan for me using those two things. What is something that could be improved about this project and this set of project instructions?
I would say if there's any dietary things, like if you're gluten-free, if you're wanting to, or if you have, allergies, things like that, or maybe sensitivities to different foods, to mention that. And then you also mentioned earlier about like I don't feel like it's totally clear that you want to spend 5 or 10 minutes for breakfast and lunch, and that you want 20 to 30-minute dinners. So I think adding that detail as well.
I agree.
And I think the difference is prep versus cook time. So sometimes it's a 4-hour simmer on the stove, even though it's a 30-minute prep. So I think that is also, clarity there.
And keep that out of my weekdays. The thing I would say is I think she does a mixed job on that. Like, I think she does a very good job at saying kind of like, we follow mostly Mediterranean. So like on the front end, this is what I want my food to kind of like taste like, and the ingredients I'm going to be working from generally. And saying kind of we are aiming for this protein thing. So like it in the background can be figuring out the protein thing without you having to kind of like count across every meal. But then I think that like where she has not done as good of a job is kind of like there's a lot of different ways to be a picky 9-year-old, right? And so I think AI probably needs a little bit more direction on what that means, right? So does that mean kind of like they're only eating bread, cheese, corn, or does that mean kind of just like actually it's fully captured by the no shrimp? Any other thoughts on this project?
I guess my kind of maybe in the same like
general
idea, like where it says keep prep minimal, like what does that necessarily mean, and is it like I guess to the point like that was just made, like is that for I need to spend 2 hours chopping vegetables, or is that it's sitting and simmering for 4 hours?
Right. Yeah. To the point that Kat was just saying, being more clear about what that means. Yeah. I thought this would be a good place just to reinforce. You can share projects. So if you share the cooking kind of load with somebody else or somebody's else, it's a great one to just share so that you kind of can all work off of it rather than just the one person. It also uses a lot of the features available, right? You can tell it like my goal is to cook in a particular way, or it's to have certain macros hit, kind of you can really use quite literally all of the things that we've talked about today as part of a cooking project, right? You can kind of like rename things to make them easier to find if you particularly like a recipe. You can ask for so something I do with mine is like if I'm for like my grocery list for the plan for the week, I actually have it organize it by sections of the store. And so it's like not like it's all mixed up. It's like we have put all of the baking staples together, all of the produce together. And so again, if you don't need it, you don't need it, but it's something that I have found helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, you can like link things, right, to actual recipes, and it will pull from those. Though put as an asterisk, like if it is a paywalled recipe, it cannot access it, right? So like many of us probably like the New York Times recipes, but it won't be able to access those because of paywall. Okay. So let's see, do we have time? We probably don't have time to look at more projects. But we will start by looking at more projects next week, because we're going to start by looking at a couple of the projects that you guys created. And so your homework is to create 2 projects that are valuable to you and email me about it. So I'll, of course, send this to you by email, but let me know kind of what you put into project instructions, what you attached, and how it went. And then I wanted to kind of just show you, last time I showed you this slide with just writing on it of how much I use AI. And we talked about some other topics today. And so I just thought I would put them in context of how much I actually use them. Networking, I think for me is like I use it, I barely use it anymore, but it was super helpful when I did need it. And so again, I think this one's very kind of like context dependent, but but that doesn't mean that it's not helpful when you are in that situation. For learning, I'm now at a place where it's like hard for me to fathom starting to learn about a topic without using AI. How much I use it varies. Like it's often not my sole source of learning, but it's a huge input. I mentioned my strategy and planning project, and that's probably like more middle of the spectrum, but like not more than 50%. Like it's mostly my thoughts and ideas, but AI is really helpful to have kind of as a thought partner that's like fully read in on what's happening. And then cooking, I think, is kind of like probably like 25%. I use it much less, as it turns out, for specific recipes, and much more for just kind of like management, right? Of kind of like, what do I, or inspiration, right? Like, I bought some stuff, what are some options here? And then home admin is a place I use it a ton. So I mentioned the like example of fixing my toilet this way, but it's like I am not a home admin person, and so I'm just delighted and thrilled to have somebody else doing it for me. Whereas I'm a reasonably good cook and enjoy it, and so kind of how much I pull in AI there is less. So let's go ahead and do in the chat. What is a takeaway that you have from today? And Kat, I saw your note about ASL in the chat that you asked AI about it. I would just try it. It's so easy to try. And one thing I will say that's useful for everyone is AI is not always the most read in on what AI's capabilities are. Because it's like essentially looking for information on the internet to answer that question. And it's totally possible that the model has had an upgrade and it hasn't been written about because it's kind of a niche topic or something like that. And so I would just directly test it. It may well be right, but it could be wrong. Okay, these are great. I think kind of the big shift from last week to this week is essentially from how to prompt AI with context to how to set up AI so context compounds, right? So you're moving from kind of like, did I even give it any context? Oh, wow, it does a much better job now, to like, oh, the context is already set up and I can just kind of keep incrementally adding to it. And so projects upgrade the quality of every reply in reusable ways is my top takeaway. And then my second, which I think you've probably gotten, is create projects where they're helpful for you, right? So just because you saw me create a project or use a project doesn't mean it's the right project for you to set up for your work. And then kind of sometimes people can get intimidated by how many things you can do. And so I just want to say, like, you can start small and iterate as you go. And so kind of, again, sometimes I will just start by kind of grouping like chats together, and then I'll start adding documents or instructions, or I'll start with a very minimal set of instructions, and then I'll kind of let them grow a bit as I kind of encounter things that should be updated or incorporated. And so you don't have to take it from me. I just wanted to share from a past participant saying projects are so useful. You will be able to teach your AI how you like to work and what information is most relevant for you in a lasting way. So that is what I've got for you guys today. Next week we will do memory, so you will know how to store things like AMAQ and A-Money and many other things into your AI's memory to work together even more effectively. And so I will see you then. And if you have a question or kind of didn't quite get something we talked about in class, happy to stay and answer that.
Bye, thank you.